hello. All right, awesome. Yeah, so thank you very much for coming. I was going to make a joke about it being sunny in the north, which I didn't think happened, but luckily I've been proven correct there. So this talk is about the state of JavaScript. That's my first joke. No? Okay. Anyway, so my name's Jack. This is Frontend Northeast. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much, Martin and the team, for having me and organising. For another 6 days, I work for a company called Pusher. Has anyone heard of Pusher? I saw someone with a Pusher sticker on their laptop, which is particularly fantastic. A few people. So Pusher are like a hosted real-time API service, so we make it really easy to dump real-time features into a new or an existing app. We've also just launched support for native push notifications across Google and iPhone and iOS as well, which is really cool. If you want to know more about Pusher, please come and chat to me. I'm also really quite happy to be here. I grew up all the way down there in a little town called Falmouth down in Cornwall, which is about as far away from here as you can get. And despite growing up in Cornwall, I was into football. I'm still a big football fan, and I needed a team to support. So I lived down here. So I thought logically, spoke to a few family members who happened to be in a certain country, and yeah, this happened. So. Yeah, this is me, not as long ago as you might think, sporting my full kit, which I've here is really cool. But anyway, this is actually the first time I've been in Newcastle, despite having supported the club for ages. I'm also going to watch them tomorrow at Fulham, so that's going to be really cool. Anyway, enough about me and my full kits. I resisted buying the shorts and the socks in the shop today, but I do have the new top. Anyway, I spent the last 10 months as a developer evangelist at Pusher. Developer evangelism is one of these job titles that everyone defines very differently. I define it basically as talking to loads and loads of developers. It's kind of my job to be here and talk to you all from a stage or a meetup, but also at the pub afterwards. That's the best bit. And in the past 10 months or so, I've given 20 or so talks, probably a few more, but more importantly, listened to way, way more. I've been attending 4 or 5 conferences a month for the past 10, 11 months or so. Turns out you get a bit bored of conferences if you go to them that regularly, but I've seen a load of really cool talks, and it's been really cool to get a sense of the kind of JavaScript community, where it's heading, where it's at the moment. I've also done a ton of teaching. I've done workshops on React. I've done a load of talks and stuff on ES 2015, and also a new language called Elm as well. Has anyone heard of Elm? Do you have interest? Cool, awesome. I would have loved to have done an Elm talk, but I'll try to resist. So anyway, this talk really is just a culmination of thoughts and opinions that I've had over the past 10 months or so. I don't expect everyone to agree with everything I say. It's more kind of a discussion point, but hopefully it will be exciting as well. It boils down to me rambling for a bit, effectively. There is a break halfway through between the rambling for you to go and get another beer to make you be able to make it through the end of the rambling. So we'll all look forward to that. Anyway, the state of JavaScript, or a series of things I've been thinking about, or how we keep getting it wrong and then getting it right. This kind of the trend that I've noticed over the last kind of couple of years is as in the community we often make assumptions. Those assumptions end up being wrong, but we learn from them and the web ends up in a better place. The really, really short version of this talk is that it's pretty good at the moment. I'd say that there hasn't really been a better time to be in this JavaScript community. JavaScript does get a lot of stick. Some of it is very much warranted. Like, you know, if you take some numbers and you map over and you pass them as integers, you get 1 nan and nan back, which makes perfect sense. But there are still a whole load of reasons that JavaScript is an amazing language to work with. Firstly, browsers are getting way more powerful. I think we've all seen, you know, Chrome, Opera, Firefox, and even Edge now. It's amazing to see Microsoft. Like, I can't make jokes about Microsoft anymore, which is at least 80% of my joke content. So we're in trouble. Browsers are getting way more powerful, which is amazing. We're seeing more and more APIs being added all the time. What's really cool is, as of like now, the native DOM API isn't complete crap anymore. We took things like the $, from jQuery, and that made it in as query selector, which I'll come back to. But actually working in the browser without any libraries is a much nicer experience than it was 3-4 years ago. An even more amazing trend that I'm really enjoying is the introduction of low-level APIs. A really good example of this is Serviceworker versus App Cache. This is a talk from Render 2016 by Jake Archibald about Serviceworker. I should also say there's a ton of links and stuff, and I will put the slides up after I'm done, so don't worry about writing down URLs. But basically, in the past, there was this thing called App Cache. And this was built to allow websites to work offline without the internet. The problem with App Cache was that it was very high level. It kind of had one use case in mind. If you wanted to use it for that particular use case, it worked really well. It would cache some files, and the user could view your site offline. That was great. However, the moment you needed to deviate from that and change your setup a little bit, or your application worked slightly differently, it was a complete pain. Jake also has another talk called App Cache Douchebag, which I think sums it up quite well. But more recently, we've had the introduction of an API called the Serviceworker. And this is a much lower level API to do the same kind of thing. The Serviceworker sits in a different thread to your actual JavaScript application, but it's much lower level. It just sits between your app and the network, effectively. You can intercept requests and do whatever you like with them. There are some downsides to this. You get way less functionality out of the box. You have to work a bit harder, but developers get much more control over how they want Serviceworker to work. It's much more malleable to your particular use case. And there are a ton of APIs coming or have already arrived that share these kind of characteristics. They might get you to do a bit more to get the base case working, but you'll be left with a lot more power to be able to do your own thing afterwards. So I think this is an important step in the right direction. Particularly if we have more low-level APIs, it's only a matter of time before developers write libraries on top of them. And we all love installing libraries from NPM. So that's cool too. And of course, JavaScript isn't even just on the client anymore. Node.js is around, it's booming. We had that whole Node.js, IO.js fork thing that was like an episode of Emmerdale or something. But thankfully, they've merged back in. Node.js is amazing. It's exposing a lot more people to JavaScript, not only for servers, but also for like robots and stuff, which is pretty cool. And really, it's just learning as an industry is where we're at right now. And I think it feels to me like the community in the last couple of years has got a lot more receptive to learning from each other, rather than just writing blog posts about why the other things are dreadful. And a trend here as well is native learning from frameworks. So the browsers taking things that were first popularized into frameworks and bring them in as native features. I've already hinted at one, Query Selector All and Query Selector, which were very largely influenced by jQuery, for good or for bad. We also have this kind of arrow function syntax, which initially turned up in CoffeeScript. Regardless of what you think on CoffeeScript, and I'll try not to go on a massive tangent down my thoughts on CoffeeScript, these languages and frameworks have popped up, given features, ideas that have been proven to be popular, that have now made it back into the language, which is amazing. It's also amazing that as a developer, you can create a library and potentially influence the direction of the native platform. Of course, we don't always get it right. Has anyone ever used object.observe? No. One person. Cool. Who's looking sorry for himself. So object.observe came about because frameworks at the time, there was Knockout, Angular, a few others, used this thing called two-way data binding. So two-way data binding is this idea that in your HTML, you reference a bit of data, you have that data in your JavaScript, and you're constantly checking to see if those two bits of data are in sync. So the moment the data changes in your code, you need your HTML to update to show the user the new value. The reverse works as well. If you've got a bit of data in a text box, when the user types in that, you want the new value in your JavaScript so you can work with it. This is called two-way data binding. It needed a thing called dirty checking, which is basically every, I don't know, few milliseconds, whatever, a bit of code is checking if those two are the same or not. This is, dirty checking is, funny enough, pretty dirty and not very nice. It's not very efficient either. So then people thought, well, why don't we have something natively that will do this, but can do it much more performantly because it will be implemented natively. So Object.Observe came along, and it even made it into a release of Chrome as a proposed feature. But then this little library called React came along and actually showed that we don't need that anymore, and maybe building with this kind of set state, this more functional approach, is a much better way of doing things. So we got rid of Object.Observe. It is no more, I believe it has been removed from Chrome. It's very much been removed from JavaScript specification, which is excellent news. But it's amazing to see the kind of approach to this and the fact that we were almost nailed on Object.Observe was going to be a feature in JavaScript. And then we kind of sat back for a minute, saw what was going on in the community, and realized that actually maybe this wasn't the best idea. And it's great that that's the way we're working now, rather than this closed-off group of people deciding what the state of the language should be. We've also seen learning from competing frameworks. The most obvious example of this is React came along with its virtual DOM implementation, Ember now has a thing called Glimmer, which is their own take on it, with some differences, but certainly largely inspired. I believe Angular 2 is doing something similar as well, and there are a ton of other frameworks doing it too. We also saw that MVC doesn't really work for client-side applications. The early JavaScript frameworks, particularly Angular kind of 1, recently Angular 1 is much improved, but early Angulars had this kind of model view controller approach. You could create Angular controllers, you had a template, which was your view, and then you had some data which acted as your model. We picked this because this worked great on the server from things like Ruby on Rails, the various PHP frameworks, like is it CodeIgniter, I think, and Cake PHP. These kind of worked on the server. So we picked a logical starting point. We didn't know any better. We tried it, and then we learned. And what we see now is this move from these MVC-type architectures, or what was it, MMVC or MV star C or something, who knows, moving into this more component-based approach. Angular 2 is very heavily component-driven, but Angular 1.5 very much pushes you towards components too. Ember 2, I believe, removed Ember's representation of controllers, and React has only ever had components right from the get-go. So it's been cool to see the community shift over these last couple of years from very much MVC on the client into this component-based approach. And yet again, this is starting to have effects natively as well. We now have these things called web components. So these are kind of components or elements that you can create via JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. You might create one that's a chat app, and all you have to do is put that one line of code into your website, and you get this chat component, for example. These are amazing. They're really cool. The kind of support for them is, as you would predict, a bit patchy. However, there are polyfills and various things that fill the gaps. I literally wrote a blog post on this, I think, last week, or maybe even this week, so there's a link to that as well. But web components are awesome. What's really cool about them is you can write all this code, wrap it up in one element, and someone else can just dump it into their page without having to worry about how the underlying technology works. They also have support via a thing called the Shadow DOM and Shadow Root for scoped CSS. So you can write CSS that only applies to that component that won't then be changed by anything else on the page, which is a way nicer way to work. However, one of the things that we did get wrong, I say we, by the way, as if I was involved with all these things. Like, I'm going to look like a really bad person. This is we as the whole community, not me specifically, was this idea of Big Bang releases. That's the Big Bang theory, by the way. That's one of the two jokes. Anyway, moving on. ES 2015 was a mess. By the way, it was called ES6. It's now called ES 2015. I'll probably jump between the two, but ES 2015 is the official line. It was a mess. It was a fantastic, feature-heavy mess, but it was still a massive mess. ES 2015 does advance the language hugely. There are a ton of new features. However, it came at a rather large cost of overwhelming developers quite massively. We suddenly got all these new features, this whole new specification, and no one really had a clue what was going on. There are at least 50 features in ES 2015 that I got to before I stopped counting, but there are a ton of new features. If you view, there's a thing called the ES 2015 compatibility table, which lists them all and what browsers support. I think there must be 100 odd criteria listed there. It's pretty crazy. Some of these features, though, are amazing, and I really like them, and on the whole, I'm very positive about the new language. We finally got promises, which make asynchronous code a bit more intuitive. Arrow functions make scope intuitive, and let makes bindings intuitive. None of this weird variable hoisting business that has confused beginners since the beginning of time. However, some of the features, whilst good, and I do like them, still come with the JavaScript quirk, which is a trademark. So if I have my name's Jack, I support Newcastle, and I've created this as a constant. So we've got this new const keyword over here. So in nearly any other language, constant means cannot change. This object will remain the same. So it's a constant, right? So I can't do this. This is plain wrong. Who in their right mind would do this? However, if I log me out, I apparently now support Sunderland. Apparently there are people from Sunderland here, so yeah. But yeah, so this is one of the weird kind of oddities of constants. The reason this applies, by the way, is because the constant is just the binding. So here, when we say constant person, all we mean is the reference is constant. So this person variable will always point to this object, but the internals of that object can change. Yeah. So I couldn't do person equals brand new object, that would throw at me, but I can manipulate bits inside the person for better or for worse. Some of the features are less loved as well by most people. Classes came into ES 2015 and have really very much split opinion. This is one person's opinion. He doesn't like them. I quite like them in the right circumstances, but it's been interesting to see this kind of divide over certain features. And really, it was just very tricky for developers to know what was going on, what features are supported in what browsers. Will a browser ever be ES 2015 compliant fully? That at one point felt like that was just never going to happen. And also kind of what features are better or worse and can suit them. I'm here to give you some really good news though. ES 2016, which is the next release. Does anyone know how many features there are in ES 2016? There are 2. Yeah, this is excellent news. The first one is array.prototype.includes, which you give it a function which can return, will check if there is anything in the array that includes. You don't give it a function, you give it a thing. You give it an object or a primitive, and it will check if the array has that in it. There's a really fun fact here, which I think sums up web development. So this was originally supposed to be called array.prototype.contains rather than .includes, and it was spec'd out to be contains, and they were all set to do it, and then they didn't, and they had to rename it to includes. Does anyone know why that was? This is like just sums up web development for me. They couldn't do this because the library called mootools added array.prototype.contains whenever it was dumped into the page, so it added contains to the prototype. And one of the kind of commitments of the ES team is that they won't break the web, and things have to be backwards compatible. Unfortunately, popular libraries kind of are included in this as well. So in the case, mootools added a particular function, and therefore JavaScript couldn't have that anymore. And this is pretty much why we can't have nice things. But there's a link down there, if anyone really cares, to the ES Discuss forum, where they discuss it in great detail. I'm not going to lie, it's not the most exciting read in the world. But if you do really care about it, then there is that link there. And I will tweet the slides out afterwards as well. So that's one of the 2 features. The other feature is the Exponentiation Operator, which is mainly put in to test speakers' pronunciation of things. But this will just let us do like 2 to the power of 2 and so on. That's it. That's the whole feature set of ES 2016. You're now ES 2016 experts. But this is really cool. I genuinely think this is amazing. The fact that you have 2 very small features to learn. It's going to be very easy to know when those are in browsers or not. And they're both pretty straightforward things as well. This is really vindication that the new process for adding features and releasing JavaScript works. So the way the process works is that anyone can propose a feature, and it has to be championed by a member of the TC39 committee. And then a feature will go through stages. So stage 0 is the straw man. That's just, I've proposed this new feature. Then it kind of goes through, stage 1 is like, we've tied this up, this is an actual proposal. Stage 2 is, actually, we think this is kind of cool. Stage 3 is, we're all but ready to add this into the language. And then stage 4 is, this will be in the next version of JavaScript. And then each year, I believe in January roughly, any proposals that are in the stage 4, which is finished. By the way, stage 4, one of the criteria to be stage 4 is that 2 browsers have to have implemented the feature, which again is cool. So new features, when they're released, will by definition have some form of browser support, even if it's only 1 or 2 browsers. So anyway, each year, any stage 4 proposals are taken and will be in the next version of JavaScript. So this is going to be yearly, very small releases, easy to keep up with, easy to know browser support as well, because there just isn't that much to check, which is really cool. Because this whole, I haven't linked to it, but the whole proposal process happens on GitHub, and there's literally a README which links to every single proposal and what stage it's in. So it's really interesting to see kind of what features are up and coming by looking at what stage they're at. What this also means is, because this is all public, we'll know of new features a long time before they make it into the language. So, for example, this happened this week or last week. Brian Turlson, who works on the TC39 committee, when this happened, 28th of June, so a while ago, a few days ago, I can't do maths, said that async functions are now stage 4 and will be included in ES 2017. So ES 2017 won't be out for ages, but we now know already that these will be a part of it, which is really nice. For those who haven't come across async functions, they basically can take something that is async and make it look as if it's synchronous code. So if we've got getUser over here and this returns a promise, I can define a function with the async keyword in front of it. And then in here, I'll say let user equals await getUser. And the await call here will wait for that promise to resolve and give me the data that it resolves with when it does, and then I can log this user out. The key thing here is that this code looks synchronous, but actually under the hood is asynchronous. Async code can be very tricky to reason about and work with, so I'm hoping this will tidy it out a lot more. Then if we're talking about new JavaScript features, we have to come on to talk about transpilers. Compilers, transpilers, whatever you want to call it these days. The most popular one is called Babel, or Babel. I had this argument with the guy who created it once at a meetup. I think it's Babel, but then again, he is from Australia. So I'm going to go with Babel. This has kind of taken the world by storm recently. It feels like every single project and every developer is running things through Babel. Who in here has used Babel? Babel, baby, bell. Most people, yeah. It's really kind of everywhere now and unavoidable. And it did a really cool thing. It let us take code that doesn't yet run in all browsers that we want to target and turn it into code that does run in all browsers. And it's been a huge driver in the adoption of ES 2015 and the language generally. But often I get asked, do we actually need transpilers anymore? And I was looking the other day at the ES 2015 browser support in its current state of the kind of edge browsers, if you like. So Microsoft Edge 14 is at 90%. Chrome 52/Opera 39, the version numbers are on 98%. Firefox 49 is on 93%. Safari 10 is on 100% technically, but I'll come on to that. And Node 6 is on 93% as well. I should add Safari 10 is like the developer preview. I think it's the one that will ship with whatever the new operating system is called, so it's not the one that's out right now. I don't think. So this is kind of cool. Actually, we are getting to the point now where modern browsers are starting to support most of the ES 2015 specification, which is amazing. This, of course, doesn't mean that we can just do away with Babel and similar projects straight away, because I imagine we're not all lucky enough to just target these browsers. It'd be a nice world if we were, but it's nice that we are starting to edge in that direction where these things will be possible. A very quick note, Safari claiming 100% ES 2015 support is very much misleading. So the reason this is misleading is because of modules in ES 2015, which I will come on to. This is the new syntax that lets you import and export from a particular JavaScript file. So there are two parts to this specification. The first, which is in ES 2015, is the actual syntax. So that's a browser being able to understand imports and exports. Safari 10 supports these. What's not part of the ES spec and is currently a work in progress is how we actually load these modules in the browser. And Safari doesn't support this because no one does yet. So when they say 100% ES 2015 support, what they really mean is we can pass the syntax for modules, but we can't actually load them, which basically makes it roughly pointless. So this is fairly misleading and a little bit confusing, but it's just something to keep your eye on. A browser currently can claim that support, and it's technically true, but kind of not really actually true. So will we ever be rid of transpilers? I think that the answer here to this question very much depends on your target, and also how cool you want to be and where you want to be on Hacker News, which is how I base my technical decisions. But the whole idea here is it's where you need to target. If you're lucky enough to be working in a Node.js environment where you have full control of the Node environment and you can run Node 6, and you can then forego those small little bits of ES 2015 that aren't supported on Node, then yes, you don't need Babel or anything, and that's great. If you're lucky enough to maybe build an internal application and you know most of your employees will be on the latest Chrome, Opera, Firefox, etc., then you can use a lot of ES 2015's features today. It really is entirely up to you. I do think once ES 2015 is a bit better supported, less people will use Babel and similar tools, which is great, but I don't think there's any harm in using them for newer features as well. And things like Babel have played a huge role in this JS proposal process and making it much better for new features to come through into the language. What we've seen happen is now when someone proposes a feature, they will often also include a Babel plugin for that feature. For example, this is the Babel Stage 0 preset, which includes like every single potential feature that's been proposed in JavaScript ever can be supported through your Babel configuration. This is really, really good. There's a lot of reasons this is great. Developers can try out new features ahead of time, get feedback on it, and kind of participate. The feedback loop is shortened because it's not, oh, here's this new feature proposed, and then a year later we get it, and then we realize it's rubbish. That can't happen can't happen anymore. And I found that most people feel like the proposals aren't so detached by this little team on TC39 that everyone can play a part by running these plugins and seeing how they feel. The major downside to this is developers leaning on features that might never actually make it into JavaScript. Though I think blindly using like the stage 0 preset and running all of those potential plugins is going to lead you to harm. So just be wary of depending on these plugins for early stage proposals, or at least if you are going to, maybe do it on a side project or be prepared to rewrite that out later. Just to give you an idea, proposals in stage 3 are almost certain to make it through to the final draft and be in JavaScript. Proposals in stage 2 are most likely going to make it. So this is just kind of something to bear in mind. If there's a particular proposal that you think is really great, be wary of what stage it's at before you dump it into Babel and then start running it everywhere. Just a note, just because something's made it to stage 3, that doesn't mean it will happen. Object.observe is the kind of example of this, that the Google team was so confident that they implemented it before them realizing it was a dreadful idea. And again, do you need Babel? It's worth bearing these numbers in mind. What I would say though is, so Babel comes with an ES 2015 preset, which lets you convert every feature from ES 2015 down into ES5. However, if you're running these browsers, or say Node as an example, you don't need to convert all of those features. You only need to convert the subset that aren't supported. For most of these environments now, there are plugins available that do that. So you can run Babel preset Node 6 to add kind of the missing little bits from ES 2015 into your Node environment. You'll find this speeds up like Babel massively because it only has to do a smaller set of work. Or if you can forego the small things that are missing, you can just forego Babel entirely. I've been doing that on some projects lately, and it's actually really nice to not have this step every time I change some code. So I would recommend looking in on it. So we'll be using Transpilers forever. One of the questions is, well, Babel it used to be called 6 to 5 because it converted ES6 to ES5. Now it's a more general code converter. Well, we'll go from ES 2015 to ES5 to ES 2016 to ES 2015 and so on and so forth. If you do want to stick right on the cutting edge and use features before they are in browsers, then yes, you will never get away from using something like Babel. If you're happy enough to use a subset of new features or lucky enough to target the modern browsers, then no. And as I said, once ES 2015 is fully supported, I think fewer people will run things like Babel, and that'd be really great. The people who are using it will do it to experiment with some of the new features, which is great too. And just on this kind of trend, we've also seen this trend of languages coming along that compile to JavaScript rather than our JavaScript themselves. TypeScript is very popular. I'm a massive fan of Elm. We'll try to hide it. And there are a ton of others that you write and that can get converted into JavaScript. When they announced ES 2015, there were 3 goals when they were designing it. ES 2015 wanted to be better for complex web apps, better for library authors, and better as a target language. So target language here means compiling to it, taking from language A and turning it into JavaScript. What's really interesting is this really was set in motion because of CoffeeScript. I think it was one of the very first popular kind of convert from something to JavaScript languages. We all wrote a lot of CoffeeScript. We nearly all regretted it afterwards. But at the time, it was amazing that we could have this language and all these features and turn them back into JavaScript. And really, the argument here is if you're going to transpile, why not add more? Babel just does JavaScript. But if you're doing that already, why not layer a couple of extra features on top? In particular, TypeScript or any of the things that add types on top are great. And it's really cool that we can take learnings from other languages and environments where they have types, for example, and apply them to JavaScript. It's nice that we're able to have this kind of experimentation. I wouldn't bet against types appearing in some form in a JavaScript in the future due to the popularity of things like TypeScript and all the rest of them. And I think this will keep happening forever and ever. There'll be varying levels of transpiler-ness. There'll be Babel, which will do ES features and React. TypeScript, which actually all JavaScript is valid TypeScript, so TypeScript adds a layer on top. And then there'll be Elm, which is just another whole level of crazy. Again, there's nothing wrong with a compiled to JavaScript language, but if you're picking one, you should be aware of the trade-offs. You should be careful to make sure it is maintained, it is popular enough, there are community, there's enough support and tooling around it, and be ready to debug horrible source maps and weird errors that don't quite point you to the right place. So there are downsides to picking these things as well. Turns out, as always, it depends, which is very much the answer to every single developer question ever. So anyway, this is the second joke. We're going to have a short break now. That got more of a laugh, so I'm pleased with that one. I was asked to put a break in to refill on beer. I was also going to say pizza, but I don't think that's happening. It's good to see that everyone came back after the break as well. I used to have a double programming lecture at university, and it was like 3 hours, and after an hour and a half, the lecturer, she'd stop for a break. And so many people would be like, oh, I'm just going to go to the bathroom, but take my rucksack and my computer with me. And it was, without doubt, always half full afterwards. I would like to say that I always remained, but that wasn't always true. Anyway, so we've had our short break. That was a good joke. Let's continue. So I want to talk a bit about modules, which I've hinted at a few times throughout this talk. Really, this is an area where JavaScript on the client has always really lacked a kind of native module system. In most other languages, we've got this idea that we can install a package, require it in our code, and then run it, and that's really nice. That's really seamless. Node.js kind of gave us this. This workflow of being able to install X, whatever X may be, require it, and run it is really cool. As long as X doesn't say left pad, we're all good. This idea of installing a package and then using it is really great. But on the client side, we've never had that. That's what we would like. We've had require.js, we've had common.js, we've had just dumping everything in a global. We've had, I don't even know, all sorts of solutions to deal with this lack of a module system, and that's great. Then the problem comes into having to write modules in a specific format. You've got a load of different conventions for how modules are written, and that leads to a lot of pain. If I've decided that I'm going to write all my modules in require.js, but one of you's decided your module is in common.js and I want to use it, that can cause me issues. Eventually, one day, we're going to have ES 2015 modules in the browser, and this is kind of all those conventions that we created around modules converging into one supported standard. This is really exciting. So this is not yet supported. I put across browsers. I literally mean no browsers. This is yet to be supported, but most browsers have committed to implementing this, so this will happen. You'll be able to have a script type that is type equals module, and this will specify to the browser that this is ES 2015 modules. You'll be able to import functions from lib, which is some local file, but you'll also be able to import from some CDN as well. This is really cool. This is amazing that this eventually will be a thing that can happen, and I'm hopeful that this will maybe do away with some of the tooling in development. For a better idea of how this works, Guy Bedford gave a talk at PolyConf a few weeks ago in Poznan on this. He talked about a project called JSPM, which is it's called the JavaScript Package Manager, his approach to dealing with this kind of cross-module system that we have at the moment. But a large part of the talk isn't about that and is more about how modules will work in the browser in the future. So if you would like a bit of a deeper dive into the specifics of that, I really highly recommend this talk. Really, really good. And ES 2015 modules give us a load more stuff as well, which is really exciting. We gained something that started being called tree shaking, because we needed more terms that no one understands. But an important part of ES 2015 specification for imports and exports is that they are all static. What I mean by static is that they can't be dynamically decided. So you can't at runtime say if something, export or import. So this kind of if X, import, react, and export some Y, this isn't allowed in ES 2015. This is invalid JavaScript. And there's a really, really great benefit we get when we ban dynamic imports like this. So right now, if you're working on a project and you're pre-ES 2015 modules, or you're in right now land, sorry, that's not the best contrast ever, apologies. But say we have Lodash. So Lodash is a huge library full of lots of utility functions for JavaScript, one of which is called map. So you install Lodash, you acquire it, and then you use it in some form. You map over something. It doesn't really matter. Then later on, you decide to push to production. So you run some bundle tool, doesn't matter what it is, something that can take all your code and minify it and squash it together, and you generate bundle.js. What you get in that bundle is your code, so this code here, but you also get every single bit of code that Lodash gives you as well. However, in this case, we actually only used map from Lodash. Or we might have used 2 or 3 functions of the, I think, literally hundreds that Lodash provides for us. But the whole library is included, because the tools can't figure out which bits of Lodash we actually need. All they know is that we need this whole thing over here. In this future world where everyone is using in this future world where everyone is using ES 2015 modules, but also every package that is published is using ES 2015 modules as well, we can do way better. So my fully moduled world, which is not the case now, we can import just, there we go. We can import just map over here from Lodash. So now I'm no longer saying I want to load all of Lodash in, I'm saying just give me just the map function. And I can use it, and that works as so. I actually don't need that underscore there, that's a typo. That should just say map without the underscore dot in front of it. Apologies. Then later on, we use some bundle tool that fully supports ES 2015 modules. And now we get our code included, but we just get Lodash.map and any code that it uses behind the scenes. We don't get any of the bits of Lodash that we haven't used. Any code in Lodash that isn't executed as part of this will not be included in our bundle. This is really cool. This is going to dramatically cut down bundle sizes just by eliminating code. And it's called tree shaking because you can think if you're like sat on a big branch and you shake it, you want all the dead leaves to fall off. I didn't come up with that term. Don't blame me for that one. Well, not yet. We need ES 2015 module support across basically everywhere, not only in browsers, but also being published as ES 2015 via NPM or whatever other tool springs up. Probably will be NPM. Once we had this, a fully ES 2015 module web is going to be a way better one. Bundle sizes will go down. We'll be able to be way more specific about what bits of libraries we're using. And it's going to be way nicer to work with as well. There is a project working on getting this working today. It's called Rollup. I think genuinely named after the Wiz Khalifa song, but there you go, which I won't sing for you. But Rollup is a bundler that can take code that's written in ES 2015 modules and do that tree shaking for us, so it can remove all the cruft and bits of code that aren't needed. It's kind of like, it works with a few plugins and hacks at the moment, because say you give Rollup some code with Lodash, Lodash itself isn't implemented using ES 2015 modules, so Rollup can't do its work on that. So it's kind of a not perfect solution, but it's an idea of where we'll be in the future. But I really should have linked to them, but there were some really good, I'll find them, maybe I'll send them to Martin or tweet them with the hashtag. Some really good performance studies of various websites where people used Rollup to bundle and save not only a load of time in terms of downloading the bundle, but also Rollup does some very smart stuff about how it bundles, which brings the execution time of your actual application down as well. Would really recommend checking this out, github.com/rollup, which is great. Finally, tooling woes. So I think we've all come across the term JavaScript fatigue, which is the second worst term after tree shaking, I think. JavaScript fatigue is basically this idea that every few months there are new tools, there are new libraries, there are new frameworks, and it's very hard to keep up with where the kind of edge of the language is, if you like. JavaScript fatigue basically boils down to everyone's figuring this out, and basically no one has a clue what is going on, which is actually really exciting. I think the rate at which this kind of change is happening, the churn, if you like, is going down. I think it has slowed recently, which is really good. But there's no denying it is very tricky to keep up with the latest and greatest on the web. I guess you have to have a stupid job like mine where I just do nothing apart from ramble at meetups and get pizza to be able to keep up with it. If anyone has a real job, it's very tricky to stay up to speed with these things. The important thing is that you have control here. You should try to avoid listening to the hacker newses and the people probably like me on Twitter tweeting about some new thing they've been working with. Find your preferred tool set and within reason, stick to it. Even for just bundling, you've got Browserify, Webpack. Anyone ever understood a Webpack config? You're a very smart man. You must teach me. There's Browserify, there's Webpack, there's JSPM, there's others. There's a ton of tools for this bundling. They all change all the time. There's new features. There's new ones coming along. Pick your favorite and stick with it. Similarly, ES 2015, Babel, do I use TypeScript, etc. There's probably a new thing that's just popped up even since I started giving this talk. It's worth remembering that you have control. Pick your tool chain and stick with it. You should definitely you shouldn't shut the door. You should evaluate every now and then and see if something has come up that might fit your specific workflow, but you shouldn't be too worried about staying right up to date, because the end of the day, if you're rewriting every few months, you'll never get anything done. As important as well, all this stuff in JavaScript land, all the tooling, all the new ES 2015 features, all the syntax, all the modules, etc. I don't want it to change the baseline for beginners coming to the language. One of the best properties of JavaScript is that you can dump a script tag into an HTML file, write some JavaScript, go file open in your browser of choice, and run it. And I think that's a really, really powerful thing. Having tried to set up Ruby on a machine before, that takes about 10 years, kind of configuring all that, like RBM, varvm, etc. It's amazing that in JavaScript we have this ability to just take a JavaScript file and run it without having to do anything. We can even go one step further and just open up a browser, open up a console, and write code right there. You don't have to install anything, and that's really, really powerful. I think people are starting to wonder if actually when they have someone who they're trying to teach JavaScript, should they teach them that, or should they go straight in with, I don't know, Webpacks, Browserfies, Gulps, Grunts, Reacts, whatever it might be. But none of these are the baseline. I think we need to work hard to remember that this is where everyone should start writing JavaScript. This should always be the baseline, particularly for beginners. And I really want us to remember that this is how we should teach JavaScript, because if we don't, we'll just blow people away with all the complexities of all this tooling and modern web. And once you've got that, and once people are confident in that, you can start layering your tools as you need to. When you realize that a particular thing is causing you an issue, go and find the tool that solves that, find the framework or the library that solves that. That's fantastic. But you should be worried about doing that prematurely. Don't pick a tool to solve a problem that you don't have yet. For me, it's all about finding the right abstraction. I think of most things as an abstraction. I think React is an abstraction, for example. There's always a price to these. There's a little indirection. It's harder often to debug things if you're working with a framework, or you kind of put a small barrier between yourself and the underlying JavaScript. But there's always the payoff. It's quicker, nicer, and probably more enjoyable development experience. I definitely know that a lot of the apps I've built with React would have taken me 10, 20 times longer if I hadn't have used React or just stuck to vanilla JavaScript. So there's nothing wrong with picking these frameworks and these tools that make your life better. Be aware of the trade-offs and remember that unfortunately nothing is free. All right, I said finally before, but that was a lie. So I want to talk briefly about performance. This kind of came out of nowhere, and suddenly we built all these amazing JavaScript apps before realizing they were really slow, and before remembering that people use mobile phones rather than just big MacBooks to surf the web. And we created this world of JavaScript apps that on mobile shuddered to a halt, and no one could work with them. And recently, particularly the Chrome team have been putting a lot of time and energy into focusing on this. So really, I'm not an expert in this area at all, but I just want to highlight a few things and more importantly, point you in the direction if you're interested in more. So Chrome came up with this thing called Rail, which is response, animation, idle, load. And it's basically 4 ways of measuring your application's performance. And this boils into this idea of progressive web apps. These are web apps that behave in a certain way, they have offline support, they're mobile friendly, and they perform very well. So there's a link to kind of a whole tutorial on Rail. There's also a talk by someone called Paul Lewis called Rail in the Real World. It should have been like Rail in the Rail, I don't know. There's definitely some jokes there. I'm really resisting making them. So there's a YouTube link down there, I'd highly recommend that too. And these, as I said, form part of the progressive web apps idea. Who's heard of this? Just out of interest. Cool, roughly just over half maybe. So progressive web apps are web applications that share a bunch of criteria. A guy called Adi Osmani, there's a link here to kind of getting started with them. It's a very deep dive into progressive web apps, and it's a good link to grab. But they have a few characteristics that they need to match. They load instantly, thanks to service workers, which means they also have offline support. The user should be able to visit them offline. They can use web push to have push notifications through a web app. If anyone has used Facebook's website rather than the mobile app on their phone, on Android, I don't believe on iOS yet, on Android you should have got a thing saying Facebook wants to send you notifications. It's that kind of thing. They're secure. Service workers need HTTPS. So these apps by default, they're fast and they're responsive because they scale up to screens, and fast comes down to that whole Rail, the response, animation, idle, and load. This is all taken from this URL, which is a massive guide onto all of them. But it's really cool to see us focus a bit more on bringing good mobile support, but also just good performance support generally to web apps. And some of this comes down to fighting, if you like, against native. I'm not going to go into a web versus native debate, because I don't think that will ever end. The idea here is that we can start to do better than native applications with these certain characteristics, and offering a great mobile experience on the web. Again, I don't want to dive in too much because this isn't an area that's my particular expertise. I don't care about people on mobiles. But if you do, I think some of this will be interesting. They've done some really cool case studies as well on particular companies. There's a company called Flipkart, who I'd never heard of, but they are India's largest e-commerce site. They ditched their native app and turned it into a progressive web app that works on mobiles, works on laptops. It has full offline support via Serviceworker. It does a bunch of other stuff. And they resulted in a 70% increase in conversions and loads of other really cool stats with high numbers. Again, link down there to the particular case study. But it's really interesting to see that this stuff theoretically sounds good, but actually in practice is good too. This is one of a lot of case studies as well. This is not like there was one company that it worked for either. And then we've also had this idea of server-side rendering. Could we take a JavaScript client-side app, like a React app, and turn it into one that can render on the server? This way we support people who don't have JavaScript, which is good. I used to be, I should have the slide, but I forgot to put it in. I used to think that people who didn't have JavaScript in the browser deserved nothing. That, you know, if you've explicitly gone to settings and turned off JavaScript, then you deserve whatever you get, and it doesn't really matter. However, there was a study done by GDS, who are the people who maintain gov.uk. They found that 1 in 92 people, or 93, 1 in something people, 90-ish, 1 in 90-ish people, is a really precise study, didn't have JavaScript enabled when they visited gov.uk. And that makes up about, it was 1.1% of the overall traffic to gov.uk were people who didn't have JavaScript enabled. So that's fine. I'm just like, doesn't matter. However, of that 1.1%, only 0.2% of that was made up of people who had explicitly turned JavaScript off. The vast majority of people who didn't have JavaScript who visited gov.uk hadn't chosen not to, they just didn't for whatever reason. That's slow network, they're on a train, they go in a tunnel. Pretty much all of the national rail routes don't have signal. That's how they choose where to put them. So there are lots of reasons why people wouldn't get JavaScript. Something goes wrong with a bundle, an execution goes wrong. There was a good one where a few years ago Sky decided that jQuery was a virus and blocked it. You can argue that one either way. I'm not here to discuss whether that was a great decision or not. But there are tons of times where JavaScript just doesn't make it to the user, basically, and you need to be aware of that. And server-side rendering is one way you can do it. So prior to working at Pusher, I worked at a company called GoCardless. Again, purely out of interest. Who's heard of GoCardless? More people than Pusher, so that was a step in the wrong direction. That was a joke, just to be clear. Anyway. I'm really pleased this is being recorded. So, anyway, so GoCardless is a payments provider. We were in the UK. We had a static website that looked roughly like this, and we supported UK companies only. That was fine. We then had to support France. We launched in France. So we copied all the pages and rewrote them in French, and we had 2 versions of the site, and that was also just about fine. Then we needed Germany, and we couldn't face ourselves to copy the whole folder again and just change the text inside. So we decided to build kind of this application that would let us have multi-language. And to be honest, a bit at the time, we'd heard of this thing called React and that it ran on the server, and we were wondering if it would be a good fit for us. So we built GoCardless.com. It's multilingual. I think it's like 10 languages now. I haven't worked there in a while, so I'm a bit out of sync with it. But GoCardless is a universal React.js application. There's a link here to a blog post on how and why we did it that was written by a former colleague. Basically, once the initial page is displayed, we make a request to fetch the rest of the site's React app as a JavaScript bundle. So the first time a user visits the page, the code they get back is the full website, but it's been generated by React just in Node for us. And then when the user gets that down, if they're on a good connection and everything's okay, they'll get the rest of the React app as a JavaScript script. Therefore, all subsequent navigation is basically instant because the whole app is in their browser already. So clicking a link, all it has to do is swap what's displaying. It doesn't have to make any network requests. So that is an amazing experience for those who do have JavaScript enabled or have JavaScript for whatever reason. However, if the user doesn't have JavaScript, they still experience a fully rendered page and they just miss out on the fast navigation. Now every time they click a link, it will just go back to the server and get the content for the new page and render it onto their page again. So doing this offers a really nice experience where for most people with JavaScript, you can offer a better experience. And for those who don't, you can also offer at least an experience. We use React. React certainly isn't the only one doing this. There's a thing called Ember Fast Boot, which is the equivalent for Ember. Angular 2 is a thing called Angular 2 Universal, which is the same thing for Angular 2. And there are loads of other people doing this as well. I'm also not saying that every single app you'll ever build makes sense for this to be a thing. It might not. It just might not make sense for your use case, your product, your users, whatever, to deal with this. But I'm hoping that a lot more people will start to. The goal of these tools as well is to make this as easy as possible for the developer. So I'm hoping that if we can bring the effort or the barrier down, more people will do this because they might as well. If you'd like to know more about this, I did a talk at FluentConf in March, all about the GoCardless website and how we built it in a bit more detail. And there's a YouTube link there as well. All right, I think this time is finally. So finally, I think, is the web getting more complicated? As always, the answer is it depends. Is it hard work to build a performant, mobile-friendly, offline-first web application? Yes, it is. It's quite tricky. But I find that really exciting. There seems to be this expectation that building these complicated apps is just really easy. You just dump in a framework, it does everything for you, and you go home at 1 o'clock, and that's all great. However, that's not the case, and we should be excited by the challenges that come by building these applications. And it's important to remember, no one is making you build these fully complex, progressive, offline-first apps in the browser. And not every website will warrant it either. But there's loads of great reasons too. I think it's a really exciting time. We're getting a lot of functionality and abilities that we've not had in the past as JavaScript developers. A few less people are laughing at us on the internet. If you spend the time and energy in doing so, you'll get your rewards. And also, most importantly, have a ton of fun in the meantime. So I'm Jack Franklin. That's me on Twitter. That's my blog. I'll tweet the slides later. I don't know if we're doing questions now, but I can take questions now. Equally, I'm coming to the pub, so we can do questions there instead. I hope that was useful, and thank you very much for listening. There's one, yeah.
What are your thoughts on the class keyword? Because I'm in kind of two mindsets about it. For me personally, I really like it because I understand what it's doing under the hood. But when you're talking about teaching people who are beginners and they start using that off the bat, they aren't learning probably one of the most important features in language. So I was just wondering what your take on that is.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. So the class, the syntax for the class, just to fill everyone in, is, as you said, like almost a syntactic sugar over prototypical inheritance. I think the classes are useful in certain scenarios. I don't know if you've done any React, but like creating React components by extending React on component is, I think, really nice. My slight hesitation with them is that everyone will start using them by default, whereas actually object literals we've been fine with those since like forever, and they still should be kind of the first choice. So I think they're good if kind of taught with a little bit of caution that there are specific use cases that suit them well. Like you say, I would never start with a beginner with them because you'd want them to understand what they're actually doing under the hood. So I basically agree with you.
Anybody else?
Right at the back.
Yeah, you mentioned in the first half there they need, what, 2 browsers to sort of implement the feature for it to meet the new ES standards?
Yeah.
Yeah. So is that just out of like the sort of the big 4, like Edge, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, or are there a few of the little ones in there that they consider?
I don't know, to be honest. I would be surprised if it wasn't the big 4. Yeah, I don't know. That's really, I suspect so. I suspect it's of those, like, yeah, the Edges and Firefox, Safari, Chrome, Opera. I suspect it's them, or Edge, but I don't know for sure, to be honest. Interesting question.
A question in regards to the next big JavaScript thing. Is it going to be React, Angular, or, I mean, because Angular 2 is quite different from Angular 1.
Yeah.
And then we have the React, which is the new thing, which is in fashion. So which is the one which is going to pick up based on your travels?
Oh, this is the million-dollar question. So Angular 2 is basically a different framework to Angular 1. In my opinion, they could have considered calling it something different, purely because I think it's quite confusing that it's Angular 1 and Angular 2, but actually they are, I think they might literally be like brand new code bases, or at least very, very divergent. I mean, I'm biased here because I really like React. I found working with React to be way more fun than working with anything else. At GoCars, actually, our app was an Angular app, and I worked on it for just over a year, and I actually didn't not like it. I enjoyed it. There were some things I found frustrating. A load of those frustrations have disappeared for me with React. I think with Facebook behind it as well, I think there's a lot of reasons to back React. I also think a lot of developers are finding its kind of abstraction the right abstraction and the right point. That said, I know a lot of developers who swear by Ember. More and more stuff is being written in TypeScript. You can see where I'm going with this. I also really like Elm. So yeah, it's impossible to say. I think React is the thing that's like most people are picking up at the moment. But that's, you know, I don't know if React will be around forever. I think potentially more interestingly is that the ideas from React will probably live on beyond React's lifetime, however long that might be. So I think we'll just see more kind of functional approaches, like with immutable data and the kind of set state approach. I think that will exist, and that's kind of where we're heading, and Elm takes that on, for example. But knowing what particular thing will be next is, I've no idea, I'm afraid. That's why it's exciting, and also terrifying.
Is JavaScript more marching towards Java, classes, objects?
No.
Because I hate Java.
Oh, don't worry. Yeah, no, we're not. Definitely not. No. There was another, yeah.
So can you tell us some of the challenges you faced when you're building the GoCardless server-side rendering engine?
Yeah. So the main thing when you're building these applications that work on both the server and the client is keeping your components as environment agnostic as they can be. The moment you have lots of like if in browser, else in server, then your code becomes very difficult to maintain. You'd actually, I think most people would be pleasantly surprised by how straightforward it is to take a React app and run it on the server. I would actually, the best thing for this is, again, I don't have the link, I'll have to maybe put it on the meetup group or something, or send it around. Adi Osmani gave a talk at Google I/O, whenever that was, May, where he took an existing React app and ran it on the server, but because a lot of the React tutorials take you from scratch to a universal React app, but he took a very much existing app and ran it on the server. He then did the same with Ember and Angular. So that's a really nice thing to watch. I can't remember what it's called. It's Adi Osmani at Google I/O this year. That's a really nice way of showing that actually the effort required to take a client-side app and run it on the server is way less than you might imagine. We're still very much like at the very early learning stage of that. I think a lot of things will change, but it's probably more straightforward than you would think. The biggest challenge is dealing with like data requests and the asynchronous nature of them, because if you've got this request coming into your server and you've got to go and fetch some data that your components want, when do you stop and when do you send the data back to the client and then let the client do the rest? That's the interesting bit that people are trying to figure out at the moment. But it's more straightforward than you might think, and I'd encourage everyone to give it a go, because it's good fun as well.
Rendering. Node's fairly old. I want to say old. It's been around a substantial amount of time now, and it's taken off. But one of the first things that came about from it was everyone was saying, "Oh, we're going to be able to reuse code on the client and the client and the server."
Yeah.
And it's only really now with isomorphic JavaScript with server-side rendering that's actually happened. Why do you think that is?
Oh, I was hoping it was a yes or no. I think because there weren't really, at the time, there weren't any reasons to do it. I can't remember when Node came out, but at the time I would take a bet that there weren't any big kind of, certainly I don't think React was a thing. I don't know if Ember was, or they were maybe in earlier incarnations. I just think like we've only just found the benefit for doing so, and there just wasn't a need to do it earlier. But I do think in maybe, if we fast forwarded, a year is probably ambitious, maybe a couple of years, I think a load of people will be doing it by default. And actually when they generate a new React, Ember, Angular, whatever app, it will come with server-side support out the box, and you will build from that baseline rather than, right now you build on the client and then at the end you go, oh, we should do this on the server, and that makes things a bit more tricky. I think in the future I'm hoping that we'll build from the server first. But again, who knows? But yeah, I think now we've got the need to do it. No one dare ask a question.
I know,
now.
I'm kind of scared now. Well, thank you very, very much again to Jack
Thank you.
for coming all the way.